Good morning and welcome everybody. I'm Andrew Bethell and I'm joined by my colleagues Jessica Kellow from Wellington and Andrew McKay from Auckland. Today we're talking restructuring options. It's a broad topic and there's no one size fits all. Whether you're in tourism, hospitality, banking, construction, retail or wholesale, professional services, food production, education, not-for-profit, or another sector, the impact of COVID-19 will have been different, but you will have been impacted. Please do not see this simply as a COVID-19 restructuring presentation. A lot of the content is equally applicable at other times. It's just that more businesses need these tools more than ever now. There's a good old saying that you should not waste a good crisis. We believe that this has never been as true as it is today. Stakeholders will understand the issues that are being faced, that hard decisions are required, and that there is a need to share the pain for the sake of viability or survival. Now is the best time that I can remember for getting their buy-in and therefore successfully restructuring. So, diagnose the issues, act decisively, communicate transparently, and review regularly. Hopefully you will all find some of this presentation useful. Today we are going to cover operational versus financial restructuring, the decline curve, the restructuring process, the various support that's available from various sources, a number of different tools that are available to use, and throughout we'll talk about some recent examples that we have been involved with. And finally, some key takeaways and time for Q&A. And I think you can submit Q&A along the way and we'll address it at the end. So what is restructuring? Restructuring, I've defined it here as significantly modifying the operational and financial aspects of the business to enhance viability and value. Operational restructuring is more about, surprisingly, addressing the operational underperformance of a business. Think here less financially and more around the effectiveness and efficiency of an organisation. So maybe it's a change to a team structure or their remuneration to drive a change in behaviour. Perhaps a factory layout to improve efficiencies, supply chain changes, those sorts of things. So, you know, we here focus often more on the financial aspects, but operational restructuring is very important. So please don't neglect that. Identify the underlying issues, develop a strategy to improve them, and then implement them. On to financial restructuring. Here, this is more to do with the financial aspects. So think sort of revenue enhancement, price rises, cost out strategies, and also changes to the capital structure. So that really means changes to either the assets or the liabilities or the share capital. You might look at asset sales, you might need to reduce debt. There might be some refinancing and alternative sources of debt that better suit the business. Again, you need to identify what these are. You need to develop a strategy to address them and get stakeholder support and implement. We've been involved in a number of tourism operators over a long period of time, and most certainly since COVID-19 has occurred, our involvement around the restructuring services in relation to those has increased. One example might be worth just working through that included some operational and financial restructuring. Was a company that provided accommodation and hospitality services to the tourism sector. COVID-19 hit, and you might remember early on there was a fair bit of uncertainty about the impact it would have. So we really reforecast. It was a very profitable organisation, very successful, but had short-term problems. We reforecast and worked out a strategy of how to deal with things. One of the things that occurred was a reduction in prices to keep occupancy up, and that seemed to be working reasonably well. Obviously controlling costs, controlling capex or avoiding any capex. Then lockdown occurred and revenue literally went to zero overnight, and this is from millions per month. So the reforecasts were torn up, and new forecasts were prepared, both short-term cash flow forecasts and longer-term guesstimates, I suppose you'd call them at that stage. But it was important to have those forecasts when approaching various parties for support. We accessed all the government support. We got the support of the lender and secured additional facilities and went on to interest only. The wage subsidy wasn't enough, so we consulted with employees. We changed employment agreements. We pulled together plans to restructure further as required. We think we're pretty well placed to be right-sized when the domestic travel market starts operating. But there's a lot of uncertainty out there. So again, we will be reviewing our forecasts regularly, reviewing the situation, and where appropriate, taking decisive action before it's too late. So that's a recent example. Hey, I'll now pass you over to Jess.
Thanks, Andrew. So when is the right time to act? What we've seen here is with the decline curve, the key is to act early. It demonstrates that you have more options available to you and it will cost less. Conversely, as you move along the decline curve, the options dramatically reduce and of course, more value is eroded. What we've seen is the early signs of underperformance can be a profit decline, cash outflows, and worsening ratios. However, there's still room to manoeuvre, such as operational changes, as Andrew was discussing before with the tourism sector, or capital raising, which for many of our SMEs really means leveraging off some of that equity that you've gained during the good years, whether that be a second home or a mortgage-free family home, the batch. Now might be the time that you have to borrow against those equity, against those properties to enable the continuation of your viable business. The outcomes become far less palatable as you head south along that curve, with the end of the curve being the intervention of formal insolvency appointments, such as voluntary administration, receivership and liquidation, and we'll touch on these in a bit more detail later. The key to any of these restructuring outcomes is the personnel within the business. They need a desire to change and adapt, and also those advising on the restructuring. They need to have the necessary skills and experience, not only to identify the potential resolutions, but to assist in their implementation. Two recent examples we've had in the manufacturing sector had quite different outcomes. The first business sought advice early on in the decline curve. This enabled them to raise equity and additional debt. They were then able to hire the right people to implement those restructuring changes, the operational changes to the business. The second business came to us too far down the decline curve. It was a multi-generational business with an autocratic director who essentially had his head in the sand. They hadn't invested in new equipment and assets, and as such hadn't kept up with the market and lost their share. Ultimately, in this situation, it was too far gone and the company was placed in liquidation. The end result was a loss of equity for those shareholders. I'm now going to hand back to Andrew.
Thanks, Jess. Yeah, I'll just reiterate, acting early and decisively is important. Jess, have you got your microphone on the background? Thanks. So again, reiterating, act early. Probably can't say that enough. This is a busy slide, so I won't read it out. But look, really first you need to diagnose the underlying issues and really work those out. Spend a fair bit of time on that. Number two here, we've got to stabilise the business. We often see the need to work on the diagnosis and the stabilising the business simultaneously. Stabilising is often all about short-term liquidity. We use and recommend a 13-week rolling cash flow forecast that both has the status quo and also a number of initiatives that can be taken to preserve cash. It's all about extending the runway, so you've got more time to implement the wider plan once it's devised, and because often a number of parts of the plan are not quite as simple, are longer term in nature and take longer for the benefit of the changes to flow through. So once you've diagnosed the issues, you've stabilised the business, you've worked on the short-term cash flow, you need to plan, and that plan needs to have forecasts. It needs to be time-bound with specific milestones to achieve, and that should be shared appropriately with those that are tasked with executing. You then implement the plan, and the plan might be over a period of a number of months, or it might be over a period of a number of years. And then you monitor. plans don't often well, the reality doesn't always match the plan, I suppose you could say. In fact, it very rarely does. So you need to monitor and really loop back and reconsider and change the plan. So look, probably the best, we've been involved in a number of hospitality businesses over time, but recently, since COVID-19, a few more. And it's probably worth working through, example of what we did with one in particular. It provided a number of venues in different parts of the country. We'd actually been working with them for some time and got involved some 18 months or so ago. We diagnosed the issues for them. That they had effectively had too much head office cost. They had a number of underperforming businesses, and I might add some exceptionally well-performing venues. They had too much debt and a few other things. We addressed the short-term liquidity issues, obtained bank support, IRD support, and creditor support, and pulled together a restructuring plan. It was pretty detailed. There was a lot of uncertainty around it, but it was clear, it was time-bound, and it was going to be executed over a 2-year period. It involved a sell down of some venues to reduce debt. It involved the turnaround of some underperforming businesses, operationally and financially, an exit of a couple of venues that were deemed just not viable, the right sizing of the head office, which was a restructure of staff, but also the exit of premises and subleasing of premises. And there was some liquidation of some entities involved. So, a number of those things, there's some uncertainty too, but we had a time period of 2 years and a number of key milestones. And we monitored progress, and things were going pretty well. A number of the milestones were hit, a couple of the more difficult ones, including sublease of premises and some sale of venues. Then COVID-19 happened. Venues closed, and revenue literally again went to zero overnight. So a bit of a disaster scenario, but we were in a better position. And we weren't in a great position, but we're in a better position than we would have been had the action not been taken. But it's going to be tough, no question about it. So should we throw in the towel, go back to the beginning of April? Should we throw in the towel? The view really was that this is not the time for rash decisions. There's plenty of support out there. So we revisited the plan. We pivoted hard, utilised government support on offer, and addressed the liquidity to buy time. That included support of banks, creditors, landlords, and the like. And probably capital raising and venue sale process being brought forward. That's that example. Look, I'll pass back to Jess for the next slide.
It is apparent in today's COVID climate that there's actually never been more assistance packages available. With a word of caution that it's not a one-size-fits-all model, and each business will need to assess what is the best form of relief available for them. So I'm going to touch on a few of these options. As you'll all be aware, there's been 2 versions of the wage subsidy. For many businesses, that first iteration will be approaching an end. The second wage subsidy has come with different criteria. It can't be applied for until the first wage subsidy has been finished within your organisation, and you can't apply for that until the 10th of June. You also have to have or expect to have a 50% decline in revenue for the 30 days prior to the application. That is going to eliminate many businesses that potentially had online sales. We expect it will cover much of the hospitality sector and the retail sector. But it's essentially a sticking plaster for your business. As Andrew's touched on, the wage subsidy is not sufficient to cover most of the employees' wage costs. So what does the business need to do to ensure that it's fit for purpose and that its employees, its workforce is fit for purpose? It is quite likely that the business they are operating post-COVID is quite different to that pre-COVID. I think everyone's seen that working from home can be successful for many businesses. Perhaps that comes with cost savings in lease costs. But do you need to consider your employees' hours, working hours, pay rates? And effectively, some of those staff are going to be redundant. They're very tough decisions to make, but actually it's easier to make some tough decisions now than tougher decisions about the viability of your business in the future. Helping with some of these tough decisions is the Regional Business Partner Group. This has been funded by government to provide financial assistance to businesses for things like cash flow preparation, to assist them with applications to banks and with, explaining to creditors. You can source this advice via your advisors, such as BDO, or direct to your regional business partner. Now in Auckland, that's the Auckland Tourism Events and Development Agency. In Wellington, the equivalent is the Wellington Regional Economic Development Agency, and in Christchurch, it's known as Christchurch NZ, being Canterbury Regional Business Partners. There are also regional offices. Their website sets it all out. Considering landlord relief, and it's probably quite likely that most tenants have already spoken to their landlords about what rent relief can be available to them. Following the Christchurch earthquake, the Auckland District Law Society standard form lease was updated for the 6th edition, which inserted a clause to enable landlords and tenants to negotiate in the event that they were unable to access their property premise. There's potential significant savings available for tenants that hold this lease. But what we're also seeing is that landlords are being reasonable even without those lease clauses. We've seen that full abatement of for a period of time, up to about 50% reduction. And what we're also seeing, interestingly, is a renegotiation of some of the lease terms over the longer term. In retail, we've seen many businesses that have multiple leased premises negotiating with their landlords on various different landlords on the same platform, and they're having fairly mixed results. And what we're seeing is that those that come to agreements with their landlords are likely to support and have a longer, better relationship out of the end. There are numerous tax relief options available, and I don't purport to go into them in any great detail, not being a tax accountant. So for a full and concise answer on the tax relief options, I'd probably direct you to our earlier webinar delivered by Ian Craig and Mark Lotter, and you can find that on our BDO website in the COVID section. One other government initiative is the Small Business Cash Flow Loan, which is administered by Inland Revenue. This is available for businesses that hire less or fewer than 50 employees. They're eligible for a $10,000 loan plus $1,800 per equivalent full-time employee. This loan is interest-free for 12 months and is administered by Inland Revenue, as I said. It's essentially an unsecured loan. If we compare that to the bank guarantee scheme, we haven't seen great uptake with this. It's likely that the criteria is a bit too difficult. There has been, I believe, $23 million lent to 174 businesses. In terms of bank relief, what we're seeing is that those businesses that have taken upon themselves to make operational adjustments and seek as much financial support as possible are likely to get support from their bank. Now, that support can be in the form of interest-only periods or the provision of short-term facilities. But what we would say, if you are going to your bank, it is imperative that your cash flow forecasting is well prepared and sensible, and that key assumptions are explained. I'm going to pass you over now to Andrew McKay.
Good morning. Some of the other options that a creditor, or sorry, a company or business could consider is instead of is an informal creditor compromise, which is very similar to the formal creditor compromise per Part 14 of the Companies Act, which we'll deal with later. You could enter into an informal arrangement with your creditors, and this has an advantage that it can be kept confidential, and you can work through cutting deals with all of your creditors, go to them and offer them put them into different categories, and say pay the smaller creditors off, keep your large creditors and put them on the drip feed and stay current, or other options like that. The risk with doing it on an informal basis, however, is that a creditor can who doesn't play, or they feel that they're being unfairly treated, can scupper that arrangement just because they don't like it, or they think that they're being disadvantaged. So, but there are a number of ways that tactically, strategically, that with the right advice or assistance, or approaching people in a sensible manner and figuring out how to approach the creditors, you can get one of these informal arrangements achieved. And one of the other advantages to it is confidential, whereas the formal arrangements are public and will potentially trigger an insolvent event under a lot of contracts. So you do have to weigh up your options. Some of the other things is it can be just a time to buy time until you can inject more capital. Is another way to look at it. Some other options the business could consider is you could hive it down, transfer the good assets to a new entity and carry on, liquidate old companies. There are risks with this approach, and it may require a combination of a creditor's compromise to make it work, and there's also the Phoenix company risk. But as we're alluding to, that it is a sensible approach at times, but there are some technical rules that you need to work with and make sure that you're not just setting up down the road under a new badge and leaving all your old creditors behind, but there are ways to make it work. Other options that a company could consider is convert some of the debt that's in there to equity, usually of intercompany or associated debt, or possibly a friendly creditor. And you might get some assistance with that, and take on a new shareholder. You might want to also consider, depending on the owner age or that sort of thing, and on the small business particularly, it might be a time to think about succession as well, and bringing in some staff who might be your likely purchasers of your business, and start trying to do that, bring them in at this point. And that could also be coupled with new quasi-equity. You might want to issue some convertible notes or similar to creditors and get them to buy into your business, or once again think about, is this a time to think about succession? We've tried to keep these really simple, rather than saying, oh, it's just small, very simple options. So some of the tools that the government has introduced is there has been the COVID-19 response further management measures legislation bill was enacted on the 16th of March 2020, which included two key options: a safe harbour for directors from breaches of directors' duties, and the business debt hibernation scheme. The safe harbour for directors provides protection for directors under Section 135, reckless trading, and Section 136, duty in relation to obligations. So basically it provides temporary relief for companies, for directors from two duties particularly relevant when a company is financially distressed. And these safe harbours are intended to enable directors to continue trading despite the turbulence and liquidity problems caused by COVID-19. The relief is intended only for those companies that are suffering temporary liquidity issues, but otherwise they're financially viable. And it's available for those companies that are able to pay their debts as at 31 December 2019 and new companies incorporated in the first 3 months of the year up to 24th of March 2020. It is not available to companies incorporated after 24 March 2020. And directors must be able to prove at the time of the relevant actions they believed in good faith the liquidity problems in the following 6 months or is likely to have significant liquidity problems, and COVID-19 is actually the cause. And that they're able to pay their debts by 30 September 2021. It's more likely than not to be pay its due debts because the trading improves. The safe harbour really provides temporary relief only, and relief applies retrospectively from 3 April 2020 until 30 September 2020. It obviously excludes basically banks, insurers, non-bank deposit takers because they're covered by other prudential regimes. So one of the key things that directors will need to do is document their decisions, and this is very important for both of these. And they'll need to put themselves in a position to rely on the safe harbour just in case in the future they've got to do it. And so what they should really be doing is check that cash flow at 31 December 2019, record that. And it may be that, you do a solvency certificate if you have the ability to do that, which is obviously what they're really testing here is the cash flow limit of the solvency test. If your balance sheet's solvent, it may be a good point to note that as well. You need to, as the others have alluded to, continue with assessing and monitoring the business liquidity and assess whether, if your trading improves over the next few months, that you will be able to pay all your debts by 30 September 21. You need to test your capital structure and seek support. But the key thing is to record key decisions that are made and the assumptions that you've relied on when you've made those decisions. And I'll now hand over to Andrew to talk about business debt hibernation.
Actually, you don't get Andrew, you get me. Business debt hibernation is alluded or mentioned by Andrew, recently enacted by Parliament. It's important to understand that it's not intended as a compromise with creditors. What it is to be used for is to park existing debt to buy time for the company and the directors. There's certain criteria that has to be met before this debt can be parked. 80% of directors have to certify that they were cash flow solvent as at the 31st of December 2019, that the company has liquidity or is likely to have liquidity issues that are a consequence of COVID-19. And also the directors have to have a belief that they will be able to pay their debts by September 2021. So what that talks to is an underlying core viability. The business had to be strong, but if for COVID-19. So once you've met that criteria, the directors then inform the Registrar of Companies that they'll be entering a moratorium period of 1 month. During that time, the proposal was put to creditors for their vote. The vote to pass requires 50% of creditors. Once passed, the moratorium extends
Hi.
Sorry.
Oh, are you back on, Jess?
Yeah, sorry. I'm not sure where I got to.
I think just if you start again at the benefits.
Thank you. The benefits being that it is intended to be a simple process led by directors and not by insolvency experts or lawyers. As with any compromise, it's essentially it is successful only if the creditors have the trust of the directors. A hibernation process has to be better than an immediate liquidation. That may require the directors sharing some of their financial information to gain the trust of those creditors. We're now going to turn to some of the formal tools that are available. These tools are the more traditional tools available via the Companies Act 1993 and the Receiverships Act. These are ordinarily administered by insolvency experts. I'm going to discuss these today in the context of restructuring, so not necessarily as standalone tools, but in relevance to what we've touched on earlier in the presentation. The major drawback with these tools is that they are public. So the appointment is a public notification to the Companies Office, and all subsequent reports are available to creditors and essentially anyone with an interest in the company.
We got some sound issues again, I think, there. Jess, maybe I just jump in here. It sounds like there's some Wi-Fi issues or something where you are. So really, I mean, these are some traditional tools. They're public. They're all public. Look, compromise with creditors needs 75% by value and 50% by number to get that through. It will be on the company's office, and you will be approaching your stakeholders and your creditors to get that through. So I suppose that's a word of caution there, but the benefit of it is that you've consulted with them, you've seen to be being transparent, and those that don't support it, as long as you get cross those thresholds, even those creditors that don't support it are bound by it. Now, they could be this could be in relation to one part of the company, one class of creditor. You can use it. You really can use that that tool reasonably effectively. Voluntary administration is obviously a more the design of voluntary administration. The idea of it was you could appoint a voluntary administrator to save the company, and the voluntary administrator would go in there, restructure it, and save the company. Or if you couldn't save the company, save the business and get a better result than a liquidation. It's very rare that something goes into voluntary administration here and goes and comes out the other side. It has happened. It just doesn't happen that often. It is reasonably costly. But if there's a clear plan going into voluntary administration, and sometimes it might be say, because there's a large number of landlords in voluntary administration, gives you a moratorium, that is a benefit, and perhaps a benefit over a creditor's compromise. Then you get into receivership and liquidation of either certain businesses within the group or whatever. Receivership is driven by the secured creditor, but can be at the request of the directors. And again, that could be actually a solution to carving off an underperforming or unviable part of a wider group. And ditto for liquidation, albeit liquidation is really the appointment of a liquidator, not usually the liquidator looks after the interests of the unsecured creditors more than the secured creditors, albeit has to act in the interests of all creditors. So that sort of covers, I think, some of those traditional tools that can be used. The scheme of arrangement's more sort of shareholder focused. Recent examples. Look, we've really raised a number of these. I think I sort of talked about a tourism example and a hospitality example. Jess talked about manufacturing and retail. So I think we've really covered these. Wholesale, again, we'll have some issues with importing, foreign exchange, landlords, third-party providers, etc. So I think we are now at the end of the presentation as such, and we'll open it up to some questions. And I see a large number of questions have come through. So we will address those as soon as I have just gone through some key takeaways from the presentation. Hey, choose the right team. You really do want to have the right team on this, and they should be held accountable for the restructuring. They need to have good commercial acumen, but most certainly allocate the team. Act decisively and early. Please, that's really is important, but not rashly. So most certainly, if there will be more government support coming out and those sort of things. Don't make rash decisions, but you need to act decisively. Address liquidity first to extend the runway, extend the period at which you can get a restructuring through. Then move to longer term viability. Get the plan in place. Sometimes not. More difficult actions are taken. Get key stakeholder support. Communicate transparently. Do not waste a good crisis, and consider all the available options that you've got. And now we'll address some of the many questions, and perhaps we take the first one, and the first one. Well, it's not the first, but one around employees and restructuring employee roles. Look, and really it is, if you're restructuring, how different must a role description be to re-advertise, and if you've gone out for feedback from employees around the consultation period, can you then later, after the period for feedback has changed, can you change it further? Is that legal? Look, I think it's really important to mention you need specific employment advice if you're going down the consultation and restructuring route. It's really important. That's legal advice, but there are plenty of free services out there, whether it be the EMA or others. So please tap into those. It's a really important area to get right, because even if you don't want to expose yourself to, or the business to, personal grievance and the like. So I'd just say most certainly get advice along those lines. There's a question here around wage subsidy, and the question is, if we qualify for wage subsidy, and it's to be implemented, some staff working 20+ hours will be actually earning less than $585. Can we continue to use some of the subsidy extension to top up staff earning more than $585.50? Jess, might hand over to you on that point.
Thanks, Andrew. So my understanding of the wage subsidy is that you're only entitled to continue to use it as a top-up mechanism if you have continued to employ those to whom you nominated when you applied for the wage subsidy. So if you had maintained your workforce that got the subsidy, and some of those ordinarily earned less than $585, you can pay the difference to other employees. However, if you make one of those employees redundant through the wage period, you need to repay the balance of the wage subsidy that was applied for in respect of that employee back to MSD.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Jess. There's another one here. What's the point of the business debt hibernation? Look, the business debt hibernation, it only came in. I see there's another question that's been asked as well, as related to business debt hibernation. Have we seen examples of it? The business debt hibernation only came into force, I can't remember the date, but literally last week. It was rushed through. So no, there hasn't been any that have that we're aware of that have gone through, but we would expect that it would. What's the point of it? Look, I think it's really to put the business into some sort of hibernation. It's actually not a tool to agree a reduction or arrangements with creditors other than deferring their debts for a period of time. We think it's going to be used, and we think it's a good tool. Time will tell how much it is actually used, but we think it'll be used as a tool, as a gateway, I suppose, to some of these other tools that are available, whether it be informal creditor compromises, formal creditor compromises, voluntary arrangement, voluntary administrations, and the like, if required. So yeah, time will tell. Hopefully, directors will use business debt hibernation and all the other tools that are available to them. And and hopefully they use it to create long-term value. I see there's another question here just about the why the difficulties around value, if it has to be. What's the impact on value if you have to go public with some of these tools? And I think publicly the tools that you need, that you really do, are either any of a formal creditor compromise, business debt hibernation. Look, that absolutely needs to be a consideration. what I would say is now is the time to get those through, and the understanding of the something that's registered or listed on the company's office, and going out to your stakeholders. I think now people will actually understand it at least. So I think it's a tool now that can be used probably more effectively than previously, because stakeholders will understand, and I think there'll be some sympathy or some desire to share the pain and work with businesses to ensure their long-term survival. But it's one of the things you need to consider, and if potentially if you can achieve the same thing by getting the buy-in of some of your largest stakeholders and keep it private apart from them, and that achieves the same thing without it being public and potentially impacting on value, well, please do. Just bear in mind that individual creditors are obviously bound by their contractual arrangements with you, but a dissenting creditor can always scupper the plans and the proposal or the restructuring plan by enforcing or going down an aggressive route.
I'll just jump in and answer one of the other questions here that somebody else has asked. Given the impacts of loss of revenue and EBIT will take years for businesses to recover and will impact balance sheets and ratios. And so the question is, we know that banks are taking a flexible view for that now and aren't enforcing covenants. Do we have a sense of how long the reasonable bank funder will continue to take that view? As the person's pointed out, it will be very dependent on each case, and at this stage, given that we're still technically in this COVID crisis, and the financial effects of it are still being felt, and a lot of it's actually still being artificially propped up by the wage subsidy and things. I don't think banks, we can say, it'll be 2 months, it'll be 3 months. I think the key thing will be that for your business, you're going to have to keep forecasting, keep managing, reforecasting, look at where you're going. And the main thing, certainly across all of our work we've done over the years, the key thing is really communication with your funders. Whenever we do reviews of businesses, non-crisis like this, but certainly when an individual business has a crisis, usually the business stops communicating even when they are having problems with their funder. And it goes back to a number of the points that we've made through this presentation and Jess through that decline curve, etc. The earlier you talk to your funder or you start seeking advice, especially if things aren't going well, or someone else can give you a different perspective and a different way of looking at things. And that's important for you to start and do that early and have that communication. Keep those channels open with your bank, even if it's not going well. Communicate that. They might be able to help you with some other tools, particularly if you've got a good history. And you might be able to get in touch with other people that can say, have you thought about this or that sort of thing. So it's still going to be a time, there's no fixed line, but I think it's about communication. It's really important in doing a forecast, sensible forecast, and making some sensible assumptions and change those and reforecast.
There's been a further question regarding the wage subsidy, asking if it can be used for employees that are new to the organisation and weren't part of the first round of wage subsidy. I believe so. The wage subsidy is an application, and you have to nominate each employee. So the converse to that is if you knew that you were going to make a position redundant, or that someone was going to leave your organisation, you shouldn't name them as a wage COVID-19 wage subsidy recipient. So I believe you can make applications for new employees. It's employees that are on your payroll and you intend to best endeavours to pay them 80% of their wage, and you must retain them for the period of the subsidy. Failing that, the subsidy is returned to MSD.
Great. Thanks, Jess and Andy, and thank you everyone for joining today. I think that brings the Q&A to an end. I know we didn't quite get to everything, but we're coming to the end of the time. Thank you for listening. What I would say, next week there is another one in our Back to Business series. It's working smarter with technology in the cloud, and that's from the BDO Information Technology team of Craig Gower, Carl Furner and Josh Ambler. I know they're right at the forefront of their industry, so I would encourage people that have an interest in that topic to join, yeah, that would be good. That will be an interesting presentation. And please, I'll just remind people, this is a Back to Business series. This is the 4th one, so you can go onto the website and look at the last 3, and plus this one will be put up over the next day or 2, and then there's a couple more in the series before we consider what next to do when people are all in the office. So thank you very much for your time, and yeah, good luck out there. Feel free to contact us if anything requires clarification. Cheers.